know a lot of our listeners like to listen on their way to work. It's about a 30-minute commute sometimes, or 15 and 15 back. So,
and if you listen to it at double speed,
2 times speed,
yeah, it's real fast.
I've always wondered what I sound like if I slow down and talk and they're listening at 2 times speed. Does it sound normal? I don't know. What's your pacing?
All right, you gotta leave that in, and so then we'll know.
Okay.
Get any questions?
No.
That's all right.
Oh, I guess we said it. We made a big push last week.
Yeah, so they haven't. Yeah, they
Yeah.
were just. They're just listening this week.
Yeah.
Those who are listening or watching. All right, let's hop in. We're what? You were about to say something?
No.
Matthew 17.
Matthew 17.
Yeah. Which, by the way, are we going to talk about the Psalm scripture? Are we going to try and make
Psalm 88?
Yeah. Do I need to try and make time for that? That was one I read. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so heavy.
Psalm 88 is heavy.
Yeah. I don't know. I want to make sure as I try and budget our conversation time. So, well, if we get there, we get there. If not,
It's hard to budget beforehand.
I know.
And this is also not one I feel like we've got to
Okay,
connect to
good,
anything.
man. But
Others
dude,
we've missed, and
read.
I'm like,
make
man, I
sure
wish
you
we could
make
have.
sure you don't skip over that one. It's. I don't want to say it's a doozy, but it's oh man. Think about times when you've identified yourself in life where it feels like you're that far that God's put you. And yeah,
that's
gosh,
way back.
Lance,
Man,
I was like, Lance is all short. You just got
I know.
a foot taller.
I kept wondering, why does this table feel weird?
Yeah.
Like a child.
For those of you who don't know, Lance's chair was all the way down, so he looked like a little kid at the table, and now he looks
Now
like an
this
adult.
feels better.
He's trying to give us a visual for what Jesus
No, he's
teaches.
he's just looking down on us. And so,
Okay.
Now everyone knows we really do not play these out. They're they don't even know what they're going to talk about yet. That is true.
yeah.
We do not.
Well, a little bit, but not really. All right, so Matthew 17.
The Transfiguration.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think one of the things that was interesting for me reading this time is just this idea of and maybe it's just in the language where he talks about it, he's trying to tell him hey, don't tell anyone about the vision that you just had. And to me, I think when I think of vision, I think of something you see in your mind, but it's not
Real.
real. And so it just had me wonder was it not did it really happen or not, because it doesn't really matter, but that just made me think of that as I read that time. Well, maybe it didn't actually happen. I know that doesn't matter if it actually happened or not, but regardless, what was revealed and spoken and understood it doesn't change that. So, but I know it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked a little bit about that whenever Paul had his, vision whenever he was caught up into heaven.
Yeah.
He was there, but we don't really know exactly what that looks like physically. But I think here there's a pretty good indication that they really did go up the mountain.
Yep.
And this all happened in front of them because Peter's worried about building tents for them, they're here, I should do something. And so I think the vision is you've seen something that means something, but don't tell anyone yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think we can believe this actually physically happened to them.
Yeah. I love Peter. He's like, it's good that we're here.
I should build a
You
tent.
think? Yeah.
You kind of need to state the obvious and to make some rash decision every time.
I know this story shows up other places, the Transfiguration, but Matthew is, if you remember, connecting the story of Jesus to the story of Israel. And so for Matthew, this is really important because this turns him directly toward Jerusalem. And so he's connecting Jesus to Moses going up the mountain, and his face comes down and he's glowing. And also even connecting what is happening here and all that Jesus has done to the baptism of Jesus, when the voice of God says, "This is my beloved son with whom I am pleased." It's the same thing right here. And so Matthew's connecting dots all over the place for the Jewish reader.
Right. And the disciples understood all of those dots too.
Yeah.
And he's connected to Moses, but he's also the greater Moses. Because when Moses comes down from the mountain, his face was reflecting the glory of God. But Jesus is himself and he's essentially has the glory of God. He's not just reflecting it. It's actually coming from him. So there's also that difference. So you're supposed to recognize that this is similar to the Moses story, and also recognize it's not the same though. This is a different thing.
Yeah. I think another thing in 17, obviously what 2 parts later where he starts to foretell again after he had the thing where he told Peter, which we talked about last week, but he says it again. I mean, it's explicit. And in some of the other Gospels, it's kind of like he talks about it in a way where it's like, I mean, this feels like, at least in his account here, no, he like explicitly is telling him, like, there's no room for interpretation, or this isn't like lost in a metaphor.
That he's going to die?
Yeah. Of
over and
happen.
over.
Yeah.
He says it twice just in this chapter. And that was one of the things that really struck me when I was just reading through it. This is just so essentially who Jesus is. It's this, he is the Son of God who we see the full glory of God in. And then he comes down from the mountain and says, and I'm going to die.
Yeah.
I mean, he's trying to get the disciples there because, again, that's so out of what that could possibly mean for the Messiah. But he shows us over and over.
And then you have Peter. Like, I wonder what Peter did. Is he's just kind of like in the background, like, oh, like, don't say anything, guys. Don't say anything, guys. Right? He's like, I didn't think we were supposed to talk about this. You said say nothing.
Yeah, but I mean, again, it shows up twice in this week's reading, but if you look at the heading over the time it shows up in chapter 20, it's Jesus foretells his death a 3rd time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And again, Matthew, if you take Matthew as a whole, that's why I would go so far as to say Matthew's my favorite gospel, just the way he puts things together. Like, there's a pattern of 3. So Jesus is foretelling his death 3 times.
Yep.
He's tempted 3 times. Peter's going to deny him 3 times. There's like, Matthew's just taking care to compose this in a way where there's connections.
Well, because that was important to the Hebrew reader, the number 3, and right or no?
Oh, there's all kinds of 3, 7, 40, 77, all
And then the last thing, and maybe this is a weird thing, and I don't know, I probably need to give some more like devotion to this time, but the whole like temple tax deal, I don't know, was an interesting thing for me. And I mean, I read what I first thought of wasn't what the footnote said initially, but when I read, or the cheat note down there, just this idea of like, cast your hook for the first fish that comes up, and there's going to be something in it. So this idea that we know, like, of like first fruits and what God supplies for, and then like the purpose of that, and maybe that being used to, as my cheat notes say, what is it, to remove, where I got to find out where I am now. I'm sorry, guys. The ritual requirements of Old Testament law to remove obstacles to his ministry among fellow Jews. And so this idea of that, paying the tax, just like Paul did, he still did certain things to not create barriers to his ministry. And so just the idea of like, I don't know, is there some tie with first fruits and like, I don't know. It got me down some weird rabbit holes in my mind.
I mean, I think that really, my understanding is most people don't really know exactly what that story. There's lots of stories in ancient times about, because fish swallow shiny things, like that, that fish have this in their mouth. And so he could have just been saying that in passing. We don't really know what happens because we don't hear the rest of the story. But it really is just him saying, hey, God's going to provide this and we are going to pay it. But I think that the big point in this section is, but I'm the Son.
Yeah.
I'm the Son, which we've already heard God say twice. So I'm the Son. So the Son doesn't have to pay the tax because it's free, right?
Yeah.
And then if it's free for the Son, it's also free
for you, for everybody.
For us.
Yeah.
I mean, and that is, I think, the really big takeaway and something to not be passed over because it's such a big deal.
Yeah.
It's not just that he connects himself to the Son of the King, but he's saying all of you are too, which is, it's not just that you're the people of God, but you have an equal status as a son of the King. You shouldn't pay a tax. And this is such a politically charged environment, which I think we could totally relate to right now, because you have the Romans and then the Jewish leaders, and the Jewish leaders are fractured, and there's just so much going on, all the layers that are happening here. And Jesus, he says, I don't have to do this, but I will.
Yeah.
It's very practical and wise.
Yeah.
That's something I love about it, because I think a lot of times we're like, well, what do I have to do? You know, I don't have to do that because this is my right, whatever it is. And this is really Jesus saying, I don't have to do this, but let's do it.
Yeah.
Because I have a purpose here, and I won't be able to fulfill the purpose of my life if I don't just do this. It's fine.
Yeah.
And he's also going to go in there and flip tables over.
Yeah.
Later. He's not ready for that yet, but he's going to.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot.
I don't know why.
Yeah.
It was just this idea of like, it could have been like after you've caught enough fish for us to eat, the last fish of the day is going to have the same, but it's like, no, just go, okay, the first thing you do, like God's going to provide. So something about first fruits and God's provision, that was probably more.
Yeah.
Started.
I was just going to mention one thing earlier before we move on to the next chapter. Just that, I mean, you know, I say to you, if you have faith like a grain of mustard seed, so that's teeny tiny, you can say this mountain, move from here to here, and it'll move. Just connecting that, because you know nothing is random. To he compared the kingdom to a mustard seed. It's teeny, teeny, tiny, but it's going to grow because it's the kingdom of God. And just thinking through that, he's saying that if you have even that small amount, when you have faith, whenever you're relying on God, anything is possible. You know, I mean, it's connecting those two things together, the kingdom of God and your faith. It's going to expand, and God's going to do great, great things through that, even when it doesn't feel like it.
Yeah, I guess if I would go back up there, I wasn't going to initially bring it up, but this idea that, you know, the disciples, all that they had seen, and they had, you know, probably like at this point, they had a substantial amount of faith.
Sometimes.
But, well, sometimes, yeah. But even that, like, what he's saying is like, that's not enough. So, like, what they had wasn't even the mustard seed yet. So, like...
Yeah, I mean, I to me, this is like, I think that section can get confusing. And for me, it is a reminder that even when I'm called to something, even when God has gifted me in some way, that it is all through his power.
Yeah.
It is all in dependence upon Jesus, not myself. And he's warning them right here, hey guys, because you didn't do it in faith. Like if you have faith, then I'm gonna use you, but it's only through me.
And when he talks about that again in a couple more chapters, we read it again. He basically says the same thing, but he brings in this idea of doubt. So this like doubtless faith. So yeah, if you have a doubtless faith, you're probably going to be pretty well aligned with, you know, the movement of God in your life, the Spirit's leading and prompting. So the things you're going to be prompted to do, he's going to empower and equip you to do.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, understanding what faith means, because I think sometimes we think faith just means like an intellectual assent, like just belief, but faith is really so much more than that. Biblically, it's this whole life allegiance. You know, whenever your whole life is an allegiance to Jesus, who's your king, that's whenever you're really participating with him in his kingdom. And that's when he's really going to use you for his purposes.
All right, we spent a lot of time in 17, way more than I thought. Let's hop on to 18.
So yeah, Jesus is foretelling his death. They're all keeping quiet because they saw what happened to Peter, but they still do not understand what's about to happen.
Yeah.
So you have like them arguing about who's greatest, who gets to sit at your right hand when you like sit on the throne of power, because they think, here we go, guys, whether we're taking this thing by force or whatever, but like we're going to Jerusalem, guys. This is going to be the thing.
And they still just don't understand what the kingdom looks like.
Yeah.
I mean, remember we started with the Sermon on the Mount, and he says this is an upside down kingdom. It is for the marginalized. It's for the humble. And they're still like, but okay, who is going to be the greatest? And he's like, come on, guys.
Yeah.
He doesn't even answer them. He just says, listen, you need to become like a child. And I think for us in our society, that sounds like, okay, well, what does that even mean? Like, do I have to become like less educated, or like, I don't know what that means, because we put our kids on a pedestal. But in this society, that meant you had no rights. You weren't really considered anything. It's a humility, right? It's a humility and a surrender. You have no authority. You're not the greatest. You're a little kid. That's what that means. So he just says that. And then the rest of this chapter, he goes through what it looks like to live into that kind of humility and service, because it's all about how we treat each other in these next sections.
Yeah. So, we got this, I mean, Are we still in, we're still in 18?
Yeah.
Yeah, the temptations to sin.
Yeah.
I think it's always a good reminder. It's like, okay, gouge your eye out if it's causing you to sin, cut off your hand. And it's like, all right, man, I think that's a good way to look at it. Like when you're, going through we did that sin mining thing, those series of questions. I mean, I think that's been great for me. Trying to ascertain, okay, what is it in my life that's causing me sin? What are the things that are drawing me to sin or tempting me to sin? So it's always
Jesus says these same things in the Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah.
Back in Matthew 5, and it's hyperbole, but also I think he would say you do whatever it takes to cut sin out of your life.
Yeah.
And so be extreme.
Yeah, just because it's not literal doesn't mean it's not real.
Yeah.
I mean, it is very, very real. In fact, he's using this extreme illustration to convey how serious and real this is.
Well, and it's just called to recognize what it is, to be able to call it out. So the self-examination of what is it, and not just focusing on.
Yeah. And it's
So-
eye, hand, foot. It's like eye, that's how you see the world. Hand, that's what you do.
Yeah.
Foot's like where you're walking in life. I mean, he's really saying anything about you, get rid of if it's drawing you away from God.
And then we get this kind of really cool picture of, the security we have, of the great love we have. God, it's a shepherd, how he'll leave the 99. What is there? There's a song, right?
There is a song. We sing it sometimes.
I don't remember we sang a song. Leave the 99. All right.
Is it Reckless Love?
I don't know.
I don't remember.
I love this next section because it's so
controversial
practical. I mean, it's really practical. It's like,
Yeah.
hey, this is how you deal with conflict.
Yep.
Because I don't want you to hurt each other. I want you to live in humility and service and love, but it's going to happen. And so when it does, here's how you handle it. And I love that it's connected right there with having to forgive and forgive. This always forgiving no matter what, right? This boundless forgiveness. But it's also within conflict resolution, because forgiveness doesn't mean you don't deal with things. You don't set boundaries within community, but then you also forgive.
I think to me there was one weird thing at the end of this that maybe it's not the napkin verse I'm thinking it is, but this whole idea for where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there am I among them. And I think how often I've heard that, it doesn't feel like I've heard that in the context with which it's being used here. That this to me feels like and maybe it's just a generalized statement. Yeah, no, this is true all the time. But here it kind of has to do with like conflict, church discipline,
Authority.
Like authority. Yeah. So I don't know if that's like a misquoted thing, or like, no, it is true. Where 2 or 3 are gathered, God is there among them.
And I'll
always.
do whatever you say. I think that's a really, really good catch. I think it's really important because he really is in this context talking about conflict and forgiveness and trying to make those practical decisions whenever things happen within the church. And it's always participating with Jesus. It's under his authority, and it's him at work in his people. And so I think you're right. I think that's his point. Hey, when this happens and you do come together, I'm with you. And whatever you're binding or whatever decisions you make, they're through me.
Yeah. Anyway, that's not to say it's not true on the other side. It just got me thinking.
Right.
So, anyway. All right.
That's what it should do.
That's what it's supposed to do. Yeah, I mean, and then I guess when you get the tail end of that, where he expands more on like this idea of forgiveness, he's like breaking it down further. What the forgiveness you got to seek, this reconciliation.
Yeah, I love Peter. He's like, well, okay, but like 7 times, and he's really proud of himself.
Yeah,
that's a lot. He's like, nobody. What is it? It's not 7. It's like a lesser number that they would say, and he says 7, thinking he's awesome, and Jesus is like, come on, dude. And it's also a throwback to Genesis 4.
Yep.
You go.
No, you.
No,
Please.
you go.
I was going to say something else.
Well, it's just we're supposed to think about this story of Lamech in Genesis 4. It's one of Cain's descendants, so that's not good, right? He's a terrible, evil guy, and he's talking about vengeance. And he says, "Oh, well, I'll return your vengeance 7 times 77." So you're supposed to think, okay, that's what it looks like to live outside of the kingdom of God. And Jesus is saying, it's that kind of extreme forgiveness inside the kingdom of God. Yeah. It's this generous forgiveness life, because that's who God is.
And I want to connect that to what Jesus was saying at the end of his teaching on the Lord's Prayer. He says, for if you forgive others their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you.
Yeah.
We don't think about some condition to the Lord's forgiveness, but the way Jesus says, it's like there is an expectation that God's forgiveness transforms your heart. You're not perfect, but he says, if you do not forgive others their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive yours. That's a hard thing.
Yeah.
Forgiveness is the heartbeat of our life as a Christian. I mean, that's what Jesus asks us to pray every day. And he says over and over, you need to forgive others because God forgives you. I mean, he wants us to remind ourselves of that every day. And that's not an easy thing. And we don't have time to, but I think what is forgiveness and what does it look like is something that, again, it doesn't mean that there's not conflict. It doesn't mean that we overlook sin, but it does mean that we can freely give forgiveness because we've been forgiven. And we should never, ever, ever take that lightly because Jesus certainly doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, and ultimately, I think for me that my takeaway this thing is like, we just got to always kind of remember the debt that was paid on our behalf, like the debt that we had that's been paid in full, so to speak. And I know that's easy when you think about like the depravity of each of us and all the things, all the ways we sin against God, and what Jesus has done on our behalf and what we have as a result of that. When you keep that kind of fresh in mind, it's hard to not be able to forgive other people just when you've been forgiven much, you know?
Yeah, it should be.
So,
I mean, I think just piggybacking on what Lance was talking about too, I mean, also our faith isn't, right, it's not this individual faith. And that's, I think, another thing that's sort of hard for us in our culture. But everything that we are and do and have is in Christ and through Christ. It's this participation with him, and it's all relational with other people. We have forgiveness, and so we give forgiveness. We have forgiveness, and so therefore we are free. It's all tied with other people and with God, every single part of our lives and our faith.
Yeah. All right, 19 begins with teaching about divorce, which, I don't know, like, I guess they were trying to trick him, the Pharisees there. He's still on his way.
They're constantly trying to trap him.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, why do you think, up to divorce seems like a weird thing to trap him on. Is that because of, like, Old Testament, like, laws around divorce and, like,
yeah, I mean, they're trying to trap him, but Jesus turns it back around on them, just like he's been doing the whole time. He's like, you're trying to follow a letter of the law, and I'm trying to talk about your heart.
Yeah.
And he goes back to the very beginning, that God's design is for a man and a woman to be so committed to one another that they lay their lives down. And you're not even thinking about God's original plan. You're thinking about what you want and how you want this outcome. So you've made it permissible to write certificates of divorce for whatever. And there's some evidence that there have been times in the history of Israel up to this point where they were just doing that a man could divorce his wife for just about any reason, and in that culture, that would make a woman destitute, potentially, or she'd have to go back to her parents' house. I mean, all kinds of things.
Even more prevalent than it is now, divorce.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
Yeah. And so he's saying, like, this whole system that you're living into is not the right heart. And it's hard for people to be married. He even talks about, like, he uses it's translated here as eunuch, but like some people forego marriage for these various reasons. And I'm saying, if you think that you can go all in, you should. But he connects divorce to adultery.
Yeah.
And I think that's something when we read it and we, especially if someone reading this has been divorced, and whether it's whether sexual immorality was involved or not, I think I've known a lot of people who carry this with them and just wonder, like, I have divorce in my past, and I'm a different person today, or I'm remarried, whatever it is, and they live with some weight, like, am I an adulterer? Is that true of me today? And I don't think that that's the heart of Jesus here. No. I really don't. I think that his heart is tax collectors and prostitutes and sinners of all stripes were coming to him, and he's pouring out forgiveness, and he's saying, you are forgiven. Doesn't matter. But now, walk with me.
Yep.
And so if you're a person that carries a weight with you, I just say, walk in the grace of Jesus, mm-hmm. and know that you're forgiven and loved, and now walk with him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's doing what he did throughout the Sermon on the Mount too. He's saying, you're doing this to the law, but God's heart has always been the same with all of this. You know, he's chastising them and how they interpret the law more than people who've gone through divorce.
Yes, that's a great point. He's picking on the Pharisees here, not people who've been divorced. Who've been divorced. Yeah. Thank you. That's good.
Okay, at the end of 19, the rich young man.
Oh yeah. What happens when you read this? Like in your heart?
I don't know, a lot. Like you can see this section. I got a lot of like, oh God. Yeah, you know,
That's what everyone said when he said, "Oh, what? When you're talking about Jesus, how is anyone saved?"
You know, I think it's interesting. I mean, obviously, the scenario is this guy's got a lot of money, or he has a lot of possessions, and so he goes through, you know, this list of things. It's like, oh, pretty obvious, right? Things that old, you know, kind of like the Ten Commandment-y type stuff, and this throwback. But then he said something. But if you be perfect, then it's like, okay, we'll go and sell. So like you can still like maybe some of those things they're not that's not perfect. Living in all stuff. That's like. But
remember, perfect means complete. Yeah. I just want to throw. We talked about that before, but that's a scary word for some people. But that just means if perfect in your faith. If you want to complete your faith. If you actually want to live in the kingdom. Yeah,
so you sell all that you possess and give to the poor is what he says to him, and he's like, you'll have a treasure in heaven, and come follow me, like we were just talking about. But then it's like, I think maybe they all have, like, you know, wealth was a thing, you know, like you're like trying to, these people maybe were in a position that were a little bit, you know, I'm thinking like middle class or like, I don't know. Maybe they all weren't, but they had something, because something inside of them was like, well, wait, why is this so difficult if we have money? Because I'm like, I'm trying to be successful. I'm trying to, like, you know, I don't want to live like the poor. I don't want to sell everything I have. And it's like, well, it's easier to go through the eye of a needle, like for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter the kingdom of God. And so that's just like, oh, that's a really hard. That's not going to happen.
I mean, I think everyone feels this way who's walking through the reading plan with us, but I just, you know, Jesus is just so compelling and beautiful and wise and everything. And he just, every time, no matter who he's speaking to, he knows how to get to their heart.
Yeah.
He sees their heart. He knows their heart. And that's why when we read through these different sections, it all speaks to us in different ways. And, you know, he knows this guy's heart. He knows what he's lacking. He knows where he doesn't really have full faith. You know, he's trying to be a perfectionist and do the right things, but he doesn't really love God like he's saying he does, because he knows this is really what has your heart. It's your possessions. So give them all away. And the guy knows, I can't. I don't want to. I choose my possessions.
Yeah, and what I was going to say, like, just then right after that, it's the whole line where it's like, well, you know, well, then who can be saved? Like, no one. It's going to be possible. It's like, okay, with man, it's impossible, but with God, all things are possible. And so ultimately it just gets to this, it's a reliance thing. It's not about all of those things above aren't even really going to happen if it's not, like, I kind of feel like you could not commit adultery, not murder, not steal. You could give all you have to the poor, but that still doesn't get you in. Like, if you know what I'm saying, it's not a bunch of things that we can do.
Yeah.
And so, even if you're rich or not,
yeah.
Or is that saying, no, you're right. With man alone, he in all his possessions, he's not going to get through the eye of the needle. It's going to be easier for a camel to get through, but with God, he can make it possible for a rich man to get through.
Well, and this again, all of Matthew, you know, this new law that Jesus is giving his new people is this transformed heart. Mm-hmm. That's the promise from the Old Testament, and that's what he's saying he's here to give. And that's what he accuses people of distorting God's plan and not having a true heart of faith. And that's what he's doing here. But he is saying, through God, that's going to be possible. You're going to have a transformed heart to where you really do love God and love people and going to be a part of the kingdom.
Yeah.
So I think he's saying both here. It's not, no one's really going to be able to do it, but I'm going to change everything.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just like nodding along, agreeing with what y'all are talking about. I think this should be a warning to all of us in the place we live, in Western culture, where we're just more affluent than any other people in history. We should take that as a warning. But also, this is a really great passage to do bread, the acronym we've been going through. We're like to be still, read this, and then examine your own heart.
Yeah.
If you were before Jesus and asking this question, how do I enter your kingdom? What would be the thing he says to you? Like, what scares you? What would frighten you if he said this thing?
Give this up. Give this away.
Give this thing up. And that
will reveal your heart.
Yeah, that's where you have heart work to do.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that you're right, that it's not about that list, but it's really about Jesus just knowing what's really holding us back from faith in him.
Yeah. Okay. I think we get that. Okay, so at the end of this, this is where we start getting into that, like, this positional thing. So it's about, like, maybe some status, and so this idea of the first, who's
the little children all throughout this.
Yeah, and just the wages we get the third time. Jesus tells them pretty explicitly, again, the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and the scribes. They will condemn him to death and deliver him to the Gentiles to be mocked, flogged, and crucified, and he'll be raised on the third day.
It's pretty explicit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's no beating around the bush in that or mincing words.
Yep.
How would you say that?
Yeah, he's not mincing words. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, and that's packed in between, like you're saying, all of this teaching on the generosity, this balanced generosity of God, and how we should be just like that, and we should honor that in this upside down kingdom. And then he just throws in the middle there, also, I'm the epitome of that upside down kingdom. I'm the epitome of the generosity of God. What's about to happen?
So we get the brothers, the mother asking the question about the brothers. Like, maybe they put her up to it, who knows? But, who would sit at the right, who would sit at the left?
Yeah.
Again, it's about this position. They're kind of missing it towards the end.
Absolutely.
Like, they think his kingdom's this is going to be this great thing. We're all going to end up getting rich. We're going to be great leaders.
We're going to reign. We're going to reign with you. I mean, you're the king. They believe that he's the king now. They just still don't quite get that he's the suffering servant as well.
Yep.
And that his kingdom comes through suffering and sacrifice and death.
Yeah. It's like right now leading into the presidential election where you can see all the people that are alongside their candidate are angling for their position in what they hope is the new administration, right?
Yep.
And so they're doing that for their own good. They're angling for their own position in that, and that's exactly what's happening here. And Jesus is saying, "This is not going to be what you think it's going to be."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right before you get to 21, the triumphal entry. You wanted to move on, right?
No.
Just to notice, he heals the two blind men. It's this section ends with that. But he doesn't say, don't tell anyone. He's been saying, don't tell anyone, don't tell anyone, don't tell anyone. And he doesn't say it now. I mean, he's ready now. He's ready to announce and confront. And that's what we see in 21. I am the king. I'm going to tell everyone I'm the king. And I'm here to confront the powers of the world.
Yeah.
It's a really, really big moment.
Well, confront the powers of the world publicly.
Right, exactly. Yeah. But I mean, he's ready to announce it.
Yeah.
I mean, and then we start to see that happen.
Yep.
Man, every time I read through Matthew or Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, I get here and I'm like, here we go.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's
me
kind
too,
of
me too, me too.
Yeah.
I know.
Don't do it.
The passion and all of it. I know. Me too.
Yeah.
Me too.
It's funny because I was like, oh man, do we really want to start? Do we want to end on this? And I didn't know how far 21 got in the story,
right.
So I'm glad it gets to where it gets. But
there's just so much imagery in here. Just to throw that out for people. The donkey that you're supposed to think about. David, when he's reinstated as the triumphant king, he rides into his kingdom on a donkey. And everyone there knows that. So, right, it wasn't some random like, oh, I think there's going to be a donkey. Like he arranged that because he's announcing, this is me. I am the son of David. I am the king. And then they're yelling Hosanna, which means God save us. I mean, God save us. Here comes our king. I mean, it's very, very explicit what he's doing.
Yeah.
Which is why they're like, this is terrible.
Yeah.
The Pharisees.
I was thinking about there are 3 places in chapter 21 where Matthew quotes something from the Old Testament. Here and 2 others that come from the Psalms. This is from Zechariah chapter 9. And when we read this, it's like we recognize, oh, this is connected to something else. But because it's not something we're as familiar with. It would be like if we're just having a conversation and we say something about Santa Claus. Well, for each of us, we've known about Santa Claus all of our lives. We know all the story. We know all the things.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's short, saying Santa Claus would be shorthand for a whole bunch of things. Mm-hmm. But here, he's just pulling one verse out of something that is shorthand for something way bigger.
Yeah.
Zechariah 9:9 is, rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. Righteous and having salvation is he. Humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. Like, this is actually way more rich if you read the full verse than just what Matthew has quoted here. Oh, man.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's such a beautiful picture of who Jesus is, too.
Yeah.
He's coming to save, he's the king, and he's humble and meek.
First place he goes is the temple.
Yep.
Kind of sets him straight.
Wreck and shop.
Hey, one thing I love about that is that he comes and he confronts and he's bringing judgment, right? This is a little taste. Like, this is what's coming for you if you don't follow me, and this is the path you're choosing. But in the middle of it, he's healing the blind and the lame. You know, he still sees those who are hurting, and he's still healing and bringing his kingdom. Because I think, you know, we want this Jesus or this Jesus, but that's who God is. He's both. You know, he confronts evil and he welcomes those who are weak. And that all of it comes from the same place, the same characteristic of love. So I just, you know, as you're reading through it, hold all that together.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was interesting too that was the first place that he went when he came in, right? I mean, he goes to the temple, and it's like maybe what that implies, or maybe that's what normally happened. Like when you went into town, into a town, you go to the temple first.
This is the week of Passover. Like,
okay.
The city is going to double in population for this week because people come from all over.
Yeah.
And the temple is the center of everything, center of life in Jerusalem. And it's the center of commerce, it's all that. And so people are traveling from far away, and they do need to change their money into the currency of Jerusalem. They do need to purchase a lamb for the sacrifice instead of bring one along the journey that might become blemished. These are all good things that were happening, or necessary things. But the people at the temple have corrupted it.
Yeah.
They're taking advantage. It's like stadium pricing.
Yeah, they're price gouging.
Right, yeah. And that angers Jesus.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so hard for us to fully grasp what the temple was for them because it's not for us anymore. But that is the place where the presence of God was. Now, it had left, but that was the only place where the presence of God could be with people at this time. That's it. So that's the home of God, basically, on earth. That's where heaven and earth meet. And that's also where you came to for forgiveness. That's where sacrifices were made so you could be forgiven. And it's hard to explain what a huge, huge center of life that was for all Israelites. But that's also why he goes there to confront. This is the center. Mm-hmm. This is the center of the religious power too, and he's going to go confront them. This whole end of 21 is all about confronting them, telling them judgment's coming.
This is also where we see, the whole fig tree thing is really just a metaphor for Israel, right? And now we talked about, I don't know how many podcasts ago, and it withers away. But then in the other ones, I don't remember that he brought in this whole faith doubt thing. Maybe he did. I don't remember. I'd have to go look. But just like we talked about earlier, if you have faith and do not doubt, you will not only do what has been done to the fig tree, but even if you say to this mountain, be taken up and thrown in the sea, it'll happen. And whatever you ask in prayer, you will receive if you have faith. So it's kind of this, I don't think it's as simple as that. I think there's a lot more to it, but it definitely made me think of, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. Mm-hmm. It's like having a doubtless faith. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't know, is that even possible?
Yeah, I mean, and also, just like you said before, the context for this, right? It's not, he doesn't just randomly say that.
Yeah.
This is in the context of, the fig tree is very often uses an illustration for Israel, especially a fruit tree that doesn't bear fruit.
Yeah.
So we know that that's who he's talking about, and then he continues to talk about it in the middle of that. And he says, this mount could be thrown into the sea, and we've talked about what the sea symbolizes. And the mount that he's talking about is Mount Zion. It's the Temple Mount.
Yeah.
And he's really talking about that. So he's talking them in the context of the kingdom and recognizing evil and hypocrisy. That's the context of what he's telling his disciples, about their faith and praying. It's not like, hey, if you really want a car and you have faith, then you're going to get it.
Yeah.
That's important to recognize.
That's important, yeah. Okay, anything else as we finish up on 21, which is the last chapter we have for today? And we'll have to call it quits.
It's going to get kind of spicy in the next few chapters.
Yeah.
For next week's reading.
Yeah. I mean, there's some weird stuff at the end with the whole stone. I say weird. I had to read it multiple times, and I don't know that I fully, get it, especially that 43 through 46. Anyway, just the whole cornerstone thing. Like, have you not read the scriptures basically about this stone? And then, there's going to be a stone, and when people fall on the stone, they'll be broken into pieces. But if the stone falls onto a person or something, they'll crush them. It's like, I think there's more to this. I don't know what he's talking about here. So
yeah, again, it's like what I said earlier. There's so much that they know
that we don't.
Matthew's just using shorthand for,
yeah.
And there's just more to the story. You're right. There is more to the story.
There's more to the story.
But I know we have talked about the idea that, it's from the Old Testament, but then this idea that Jesus is the cornerstone of the new temple of God, that that we see that all throughout the New Testament letters too. They'll start to build on that. But I mean, that is what he's referencing. I'm the cornerstone, and I'm going to be the one that everything is built around. And that also, again, includes judgment for those who go against the cornerstone.
Yeah. All right, well, good job. Thank you, guys. And looking forward to next week.